Good evening, my name is Alex Tanoskevich, and today I'll be teaching you all how to take some long exposure photos using a digital single lens reflex camera, or DSLR. Also, attached are some documents which can help you follow along with the information provided. On the agenda for today, we will be going over the following: the components of the camera, then I'll orient you to the camera, then the exposure triangle, and finally we'll look over some long exposure photos. So, in order to know how a DSLR camera works, we need to go over some minor components. Number 1, camera lens. Number 2, the reflex mirror. Number 3 is the focal plane shutter. Number 4 is the image sensor. Number 5 is the matte focusing screen. Number 6 is the condenser lens. Number 7 is the pentamirror. And number 8 is the viewfinder, which I look through. So basically, if I'm looking through the viewfinder, number 8, I can see the image because the light is traveling through the camera lens down here at number 1, then bouncing off the reflex mirror onto the matte focusing screen, through the condenser lens, and then into the pentamirror and out through the viewfinder. Number 3 and 4, the focal plane shutter and the image sensor, come into play when I take a picture. So the instant that a picture is taken, the reflex mirror, as shown here, will flip up, and then the light is captured by the focal plane shutter and the image sensor. So now we know what is happening. Let me orient you to the camera. Note that the main difference between this camera and a different other digital camera is the reflex portion. Now to orient you to the camera. This is the Canon T5. Here on the left is a top-down view where you can see some of the main components. Starting on the bottom with the focal plane indicator. This is basically just an indent on the top of your camera that lets you know where that focal plane shutter is on the inside of your camera. Next is a flash hot shoe, which is basically just so you can add a flash saver to your camera, which lets you save battery for your camera. Next is the mode dial for switching between various modes on your camera, and also a movie mode icon, which is indicating where that movie mode is. Above that is the flash button. So you press down that button and your flash will pop up, and then you're able to take flash photography. Above that is the main dial for basically just changing between various things on the camera. Next, above that is the shutter button for taking pictures, obviously. Next is the red eye reduction and self-timer lamp. Basically, so red eye reduction, when you're taking flash photography, it helps you reduce red eye. And for a self-timer lamp, basically when you're taking self-timed photos, it'll let you know how many seconds you have. Next, the autofocus and manual focus switch. That's a switch that's on the physical lens, and with that, in the autofocus, it'll focus itself, and in the manual focus, you physically have to turn the lens and focus it the way you want it. The image stabilizer is next, and that switch helps you get sharper images. But when you're using a tripod, I suggest turning it off because you'll actually get a better image when you're using a tripod, and that's off. Next is the speaker, which is just on top of the camera next to the focal plane indicator, mainly for taking videos. Next is the lens release. You press on the lens release, it'll help you release the lens, and you can take it off for cleaning or changing to a different lens. Next, moving on to the right side, is the forward view of the camera. On that, on the left, you can see the port access door, which in the port access door has an HDMI port, a USB port, and a port for remote shutter control, which is basically just a handheld button that you can plug in, and you don't physically have to touch the camera to take pictures. Next is the quick control button. For the quick control button, it just allows you for faster selection between single shooting, continuous shooting, or self-timer modes. Next is the menu button, where you can change all the settings of the camera. Next is the playback button, so you can review the photos you have. Next is above that is the cross keys. In the cross keys, the up button is the ISO, so you can change the ISO of your camera, which I will go over later. To the right of that is the autofocus, so you can change between the autofocus modes of your camera. Down is the white balance, where you can change the white balance of your camera. To the left is the drive mode, which is the same thing as the quick control, just a little bit slower. In the middle, of course, is the set button to set the mode that you want. Now, above that is abbreviation DISP, display. So, if you click on that, it allows you to toggle the display of your display screen back on. Above that to the left is the exposure compensation button. This button, if you hold it down, allows you to change the f-stop when you're in manual mode, and in other modes it'll change various things. Up to the right is the AF point selection button. This basically allows you to choose where you want your camera to focus. Next to that is the AE lock button, which is basically if you hold down, it'll blacken your display. The next is the viewfinder. Well, look through that, you'll see the image. Next is the viewfinder adjustment. When you're looking through your viewfinder, it's adjusted to your eyesight. For the viewfinder adjustment, you can adjust it to various types of eyesights. And right next to that is the live view and movie record button. If you click that live view button, it'll change your display from capturing what you're seeing through your viewfinder to on your display screen. And if you click that when you're in movie mode, it'll help you record your movie. Now some things that you should notice on the inside of the viewfinder on the left and the display screen on the right. So if you look through your viewfinder, these are the items that I pointed out are what you will see. What I circled here is the AF point selection, as I talked about earlier. So when you hold that button down, one of these black dots will light up red, and that's when your camera will be focusing. So to change that, you simply hold down that button and use the main dial to scroll where you want to focus. Then you let go of that button and it will be focusing on that. You can either focus on one point at a time, or you can focus it on all the points. On the bottom, this is where your shutter speed will be displayed, and your f-stop display, then your exposure compensation, your ISO, then your max burst frames. With the exposure compensation, that little tick mark that's underneath the meter, if it's past the -2 or past the +2, your photo will not be exposed correctly and you won't be able to see the image. Next on the right, the display screen. This is what you'll see. You'll see the shutter speed, then you'll see that exposure compensation meter underneath that, then the f-stop right next to the shutter speed, then the ISO. And the M means it's in manual mode. Now that you are oriented to the camera, I will teach you about a few exposure elements that you should know. These elements are within the exposure triangle. First, I will go over ISO. ISO is basically the measure of the camera sensitivity to light. When you want to choose an ISO setting, you should mainly consider how well lit the object is. So if you're in a darker room, or if you have moving objects, you probably want to choose a higher ISO. Basically, for ISO, the more light the object has, the lower you want your ISO to be. Generally, with a lower ISO, the sharper your image will be. Next, I'll go over aperture. Aperture is measured in f-stops, as I discussed earlier. So, when you take a picture, the lens of your camera will open a certain diameter, allowing light into it. Changing the aperture can also change the depth of field of an image. So, in the examples I provided, you can see that the left image has a higher f-stop, meaning a large depth of field, and that the right image has a low f-stop, producing a shallow depth of field. Finally, shutter speed. Shutter speed is measured in seconds or fractions of seconds. When taking pictures at shutter speeds less than 1/30th of a second, you'll probably want to use a stable base or tripod because your image may be easily affected by camera shake. In the images provided, you can see examples if when you would want to use high shutter speeds. Finally, let's look through some long exposure photos. Feel free to take some notes while looking through these. I have now gone over everything that you need to know in order to take some good long exposure photos. I hope that you will take this knowledge and use it to your advantage.